At 1:23 p.m. on December 19, 1944, Corporal Daniel Hartwell knelt on the blood-soaked stone floor of a bombed-out church in Wiltz, Luxembourg, staring at two men who were both going to die if he didn't make a choice in the next 30 seconds. 6 feet to his left, a German SS officer lay against the shattered remains of a wooden pew. Arterial blood pumped from a wound in his thigh. His lips were blue. He had maybe 2 minutes. 8 feet to his right, Sergeant Thomas Brooks from Charlie Company screamed at him. Brooks had shrapnel embedded in his left calf. Painful. Bleeding but not immediately lethal. He'd survive for hours without treatment. "Hartwell, get over here. That's an order." The German officer's eyes found Hartwell's. No words, just the universal look of a man watching his life drain away. Hartwell reached for his medical kit. The choice he made in that moment would save dozens of lives, change enemy doctrine, and nearly get him court-martialed. But first, it would make a German SS officer refuse to believe what he was seeing with his own eyes. Daniel Hartwell was 22 years old. He'd grown up in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, the son of a pharmacist. He'd spent 3 years studying pre-med at Penn State before the draft notice arrived in March 1943. The Army looked at his transcripts and immediately assigned him to the Medical Corps. 8 weeks of basic training, 12 weeks of combat medic school at Fort Sam Houston, then straight to the replacement depot and onto a transport ship headed for England. He landed in France on October 3, 1944, assigned to the 28th Infantry Division's 110th Regiment. He'd been in combat for 76 consecutive days. In that time, Hartwell had treated 143 wounded soldiers. He'd saved most of them. Lost 17. Each death stayed with him. Each name burned into his memory during the sleepless hours, between artillery barrages. But Hartwell had never killed anyone. Never fired his weapon except during training. His M1 carbine stayed slung across his back while he worked. His only weapons were morphine, sulfa powder, and compression bandages. He'd learned something crucial during those 76 days. Something they'd taught him in training but that he'd only truly understood after watching men die. Triage wasn't about loyalty. It wasn't about flags or uniforms. It was about physics, about blood volume and oxygen, and which injuries would kill first. The medics had a saying, "Treat first who dies first." Simple, brutal, effective. The problem was that sometimes the person who dies first is wearing the wrong uniform. PFC Raymond Kowalski had been Hartwell's first real test, November 8, 1944. Outside Wassenack, Germany. A German machine gun position opened up on their patrol. Everyone dove for cover. Kowalski took 3 rounds across his chest before he hit the ground, but 2 more soldiers went down in the same burst. Private Eddie Vasquez caught a round through his shoulder. Lieutenant Morrison took shrapnel from a nearby explosion. Hartwell crawled through incoming fire to reach them. He could see all 3 casualties. Kowalski was 20 years old from Chicago. Blood bubbled from his mouth with each breath. Sucking chest wound. Punctured lung, maybe worse. Vasquez screamed and clutched his shoulder. Through and through, ugly but survivable. Morrison was unconscious. Shrapnel had opened his scalp. Blood everywhere. But head wounds always bled like that. Hartwell could see the man's chest rising and falling. Steady breathing. Protocol was clear. Kowalski first. The sucking chest wound would kill him in minutes. But Lieutenant Morrison was an officer. Vasquez was crying for help, and Kowalski's eyes were already glazing over. Hartwell went to Kowalski anyway, sealed the chest wound, started plasma, radioed for evacuation. Kowalski lived, spent 6 months in hospitals but eventually went home. Morrison woke up 20 minutes later with a headache and 16 stitches. Vasquez got patched up and was back on duty in 3 weeks. But Hartwell remembered the moment of choice. The voices telling him to check the officer first, the temptation to treat the easier wounds and avoid the hard call. He'd followed protocol. It worked. Then came Sergeant James Mitchell. December 2nd, just 17 days before the church. A German patrol ambushed their position at dawn. Mitchell took a round through his abdomen. Went down hard. But during the firefight, a German soldier got hit too. Crawled into a crater 20 feet from American lines. Hartwell could hear him screaming. Young voice, terrified. When the shooting stopped, Hartwell had 2 patients. Mitchell, his own sergeant, gut shot and in agony. And a German private, maybe 19 years old, with a sucking chest wound and a punctured lung. The German was dying faster. Hartwell went to the German first. Mitchell survived the extra 5 minutes of waiting. The German lived too. Both evacuated within the hour. But Captain Theodore Weber, Hartwell's company commander, pulled him aside that night. "I saw what you did today, Corporal. I'm not going to write you up, but understand something. If you ever choose a German over one of our boys again, and that American dies because you were busy playing Good Samaritan, I will personally charge you with dereliction of duty. Are we clear?" "Yes, sir." "The Geneva Convention is a nice idea, Hartwell, but this is war. Our men come first." Hartwell didn't argue, didn't explain, just saluted and walked away. But he knew Captain Weber was wrong. Not morally wrong, maybe, but tactically wrong. Because the one thing Hartwell had learned in 76 days of combat was this: if you start choosing patients based on politics instead of medicine, people die who didn't have to. And that's how you lose your humanity, one bad decision at a time. The U.S. Army Medical Corps trained its medics on a simple principle derived from the Geneva Convention. Wounded soldiers received treatment based on severity of injury, not nationality. The most critically wounded got care first, always. In classroom settings at Fort Sam Houston, this made perfect sense. Medical ethics demanded it. International law required it. The Red Cross inspectors expected it. But on the frozen battlefields of Belgium and Luxembourg in December 1944, that principle became complicated because treating enemy wounded first meant American soldiers waited. And American soldiers who waited sometimes died. And when American soldiers died because a medic was treating Germans, other soldiers noticed. They remembered. They got angry. Hartwell had heard the grumbling. In foxholes during quiet moments. Around fires when men thought he wasn't listening. Why the hell are we patching up Krauts when our own guys are bleeding? Geneva Convention doesn't mean shit when it's your buddy screaming for morphine. The pressure came from above, too. Officers who understood the political reality. Every German saved was a German who might kill Americans tomorrow. Every moment spent on enemy casualties was a moment not spent keeping American soldiers combat ready. Captain Weber wasn't the only officer who'd made his expectations clear. The entire command structure operated on an unspoken understanding. Follow the Geneva Convention in theory, but in practice, when push came to shove, Americans first. The problem was that push came to shove described every single day in combat. Hartwell had been forced to make the choice 11 times since landing in France. 11 times he'd faced American and German wounded simultaneously. 11 times he'd assessed injuries and treated based on severity. 7 times the German was worse off. 7 times Hartwell treated the German first. All 18 patients had survived to reach field hospitals, but Hartwell's reputation was growing. Some medics called him Saint Dan behind his back. Others had less flattering names. The men in his unit trusted him with their lives, but they also watched him carefully, wondering if, when the moment came, he'd really choose them, or if he'd pick some German over his own countrymen. The tension had been building for weeks. Then came December 16, 1944. The Germans launched a massive counteroffensive through the Ardennes forest. Hundreds of thousands of troops, tanks, artillery, the whole weight of Germany's Western Front smashing into surprised American positions. The 110th Regiment got hit hard, really hard. Companies scattered, communications cut. Casualties mounting by the hour. December 16th, second day of the German offensive. Hartwell's unit was falling back through heavy forest near Clairvaux. German tanks had broken through. Infantry everywhere. Complete chaos. During the retreat, they stumbled into a German aid station. 6 wounded Germans, 2 German medics with their hands up, surrendering immediately. The American soldiers wanted to leave them. Just keep moving. Captain Weber agreed. We don't have time for prisoners. Mark the position and keep going. But Hartwell saw one of the German wounded. SS trooper, maybe 25. Massive head wound from shrapnel. Unconscious. Skull fracture. Possible brain bleed. Without immediate treatment, dead within an hour. Sir, we need to stabilize that one. Hartwell pointed. Weber stared at him. We need to move, Corporal. That's what we need. He'll die, sir. So will we if we stay here. Move out. The unit started walking. Hartwell didn't. He went to the wounded German, cleaned the wound, applied a pressure bandage, administered morphine, checked his vitals, did everything possible in 3 minutes of field care. Then he told the German medics in broken German, keep pressure here. Don't let him sleep. Verstehen? They nodded frantically, grateful, terrified. Hartwell caught up to his unit 5 minutes later. Captain Weber was waiting. I told you to move, Corporal. I moved, sir, after I stabilized the patient. That patient was an SS trooper. That patient was dying, sir. They stared at each other. Around them, the sound of distant artillery. German voices shouting in the forest. The whole world falling apart. Weber finally spoke. If we'd gotten ambushed while you were playing doctor, and one of our men died because of it, that would be on you. Think about that next time you decide to ignore orders. Yes, sir. But Hartwell didn't regret it. Couldn't regret it. Because 3 weeks later, he'd learned that SS trooper's name was Oscar Bauer, and that Bauer had survived to reach German lines, and that Bauer had told his commanding officer about the American medic who'd saved his life. That story would spread. And spreading, it would change things. But first, Hartwell had to survive December 19th. That morning, the 110th Regiment was defending Wiltz, a small town in Luxembourg. The Germans were closing in from 3 sides. American artillery was falling back. Infantry holding on by fingernails. Hartwell's aid station was a bombed-out church on the southern edge of town. Stone walls offered some protection from shrapnel. The vaulted ceiling was half collapsed. Stained glass windows blown out. Pews shattered into splinters. He'd treated 16 soldiers that morning. Wounds from small arms, shrapnel, burns. Patched them up and sent them back to defensive positions or evacuated them if the wounds were severe. Then at 1:15 p.m., everything went to hell simultaneously. German artillery barrage. Concentrated. Brutal. Shells walking through American positions. Then immediate infantry assault. SS troops. Veterans. They hit the southern defensive line hard. The line broke. American soldiers fell back through the streets. Some made it to second-line positions. Others didn't make it at all. Sergeant Thomas Brooks from Charlie Company came running into the church, blood soaking through his left pant leg. German breakthrough! They're right behind us! He'd taken shrapnel from an exploding mortar round, multiple fragments in his calf. Painful, bleeding steadily, but not arterial. He could walk, could even run if he had to. Hartwell moved to treat him. Then the church door slammed open again. 2 German soldiers stumbled in, one supporting the other. Both in SS camouflage. The one being supported had his left hand clamped around his right thigh. Blood pumped between his fingers. Arterial bleed, femoral artery compromised. They saw Hartwell, saw his Red Cross armband. The wounded German said something in German, desperate, pleading. His buddy lowered him to the floor against a pew, then raised his hands, surrendering. The wounded German's Yes rolled back. He was going into shock. Blood loss, massive. He had minutes, at most. Sergeant Brooks stared at them, then at Hartwell. "You've got to be fucking kidding me." Hartwell looked at both casualties. Brooks, mobile, conscious, stable. German officer, exsanguinating, fading, critical. There was no choice, not medically. Brooks saw something in Hartwell's face. "No, no, Corporal, don't you dare. Don't you fucking dare treat that Nazi before me." Hartwell grabbed his aid kit and moved toward the German officer. Brooks screamed, "That's an order, Hartwell. I'm ordering you to treat me first." Hartwell knelt beside the German. The man's eyes flickered open, pale, gray lips, dying. Behind him, Hartwell heard Brooks chambering around. "Sergeant, put the weapon down." Hartwell didn't turn around, kept his eyes on the German officer's wound. "Treat me first, or I swear to God, you'll survive another 20 minutes with that wound. He's got less than 2. Put the weapon down." The German officer's hand had gone slack. Not enough pressure on the wound anymore. Blood flowing faster now, pooling on the stone floor. Hartwell pulled out his trauma shears, cut away the German's trousers. The wound was high on the inner thigh. Shrapnel had torn through the femoral artery. Textbook fatal injury without immediate intervention. "This is treason," Brooks' voice shook. "You're saving a Nazi, a fucking SS officer. Look at his collar tabs." Hartwell looked. SS Obersturmführer, first lieutenant equivalent. This man had probably commanded troops that had killed Americans. Maybe killed men from their own regiment. Maybe killed men Hartwell knew. Didn't matter. Medical protocol didn't care about collar tabs. "I'm saving a human being who's bleeding out." Hartwell packed the wound with gauze, applied direct pressure. The German gasped, his eyes focused briefly on Hartwell's face. "Amerikaner," whispered, confused. "Don't talk. Stay still." Behind them, the sound of gunfire intensified. Close, maybe 2 blocks away. The German soldier who'd carried his officer in stood frozen by the door, hands still raised, eyes wide. Hartwell worked fast. Pressure bandage, tight. Had to stop the arterial flow. His hands moved automatically. Muscle memory from hundreds of training repetitions. The German's breathing steadied slightly. Color returning to his face, not out of danger, but no longer actively dying. Brooks hadn't lowered his weapon. "When Captain Weber hears about this, Captain Weber is dead." The voice came from the doorway. Private Eddie Vasquez stood there, the same Vasquez that Hartwell had treated back in November. "Took a tank round 10 minutes ago. Lieutenant Morrison's in command now, and he's ordering full retreat. We're evacuating to Bastogne." Brooks stared. "Weber's dead?" "Most of Charlie Company's dead, Sarge. We need to move, now." Hartwell finished securing the German's bandage. The bleeding had slowed. Not stopped, but controlled. The officer would need surgery within a few hours, but he'd make it that long now. "Okay, Sergeant Brooks, your turn." Hartwell moved to examine Brooks's leg. Brooks jerked away. "Don't fucking touch me. I'll wait for a real medic." "I am a real medic." "You're a traitor!" Gunfire erupted outside. Very close. The crack of Kar 98K rifles mixed with the deeper bark of M1 Garands. German voices shouting. American voices shouting back. Vasquez ducked. "We're out of time. We gotta go." Hartwell looked at the German officer. Stabilized but immobile. Looked at the other German soldier. Still standing with hands up. Looked at Brooks, bleeding but mobile. Looked at Vasquez, uninjured. There was no good answer. The Germans couldn't come with them. No transport. No way to evacuate prisoners during a fighting retreat. Brooks and Vasquez needed to move immediately. But leaving the German office, Sir meant he'd die anyway. The bandage would hold for a while, but without proper medical care, Infection or renewed bleeding would kill him. All of that work, all of that choice, all of that moral calculation. And he might die anyway. Vasquez grabbed Hartwell's arm. "Doc, we gotta move right now. The Krauts are literally in the next street." The German soldier by the door said something in German. Urgent, pointing at his officer. Hartwell understood the tone if not the words. "You can't leave him." Brooks had moved to the door, limping badly. The shrapnel in his calf clearly hurt, but adrenaline was keeping him mobile. "I'm not dying in this church because you wanted to save a Nazi. I'm gone." He pushed past Vasquez and disappeared into the street. Vasquez looked at Hartwell. "Doc?" The German officer's eyes opened again. He looked at Hartwell, said something in German. Weak voice. Then in broken English, "Danke, thank you." Hartwell made his decision. "I'm staying." "What?" "He'll die if I leave. I'm staying until I can get him to proper care." Vasquez stared like Hartwell had lost his mind. "Doc, when the Germans get here, they're gonna shoot you. You're a combat soldier. They don't have to take you prisoner." "I'm a medic. I'm protected under the Geneva Convention." "Good luck with that when some pissed-off SS trooper finds you treating one of their wounded. They'll think you tortured him." Hartwell pointed at the other German soldier. "He saw everything. He'll explain." The gunfire outside was continuous now, extremely close, the sound of boots running, men screaming orders. Vasquez backed toward the door. "This is crazy, Doc. This is literally insane." "Get out of here, Vasquez. Make it to Bastogne. Tell them what happened." "Tell them you stayed behind to save an SS officer?" "Yeah, that'll go over great." "Tell them I stayed with a critically wounded patient, which is the truth." Vasquez hesitated one more second, then bolted. Hartwell heard his footsteps fade into the chaos outside. Then German voices. Very close. Right outside the church. The German soldier by the door lowered his hands, moved quickly to his officer's side, knelt down, looked at Hartwell with an expression of total confusion, like he couldn't process what was happening. The officer spoke to him. German too rapid for Hartwell to follow. The soldier nodded, responded, then looked at Hartwell and said in careful English, "He asked, why? Why you save him?" Hartwell checked the bandage, still holding. "Good. Because he was dying. But you are enemies. I'm a medic. He's a patient." The soldier translated. The officer said something back. The soldier turned to Hartwell. "He say, his name is Karl Steiner. He want to know your name." "Corporal Daniel Hartwell, 110th Infantry Regiment, 28th Division." The translation. Steiner nodded weakly, said something else. The soldier translated. "He say, you will be his prisoner. He give you his word you will not be harmed. He will personally guarantee your safety." "I'm a medical personnel. I'm supposed to be neutral." More translation. Steiner responded. "He say, in theory, yes. In practice, when his men come through that door and find American soldier, they may shoot first. He will protect you. You have his word as officer." The door crashed open. 4 German soldiers burst in, weapons raised, shouting. They saw Hartwell, saw the Red Cross armband, saw Steiner on the floor, saw the blood. They started to raise their rifles toward Hartwell. Steiner shouted something, commanding voice despite the weakness. The soldiers hesitated. Steiner shouted again, gestured at Hartwell, pointed at his own bandaged leg. The soldiers slowly lowered their weapons. One of them, an older sergeant, moved closer, looked at Steiner's wound, looked at the bandaging. Professional job, clean, proper pressure. He said something to Steiner. Steiner responded, pointed at Hartwell, spoke at length. The sergeant looked at Hartwell with an expression of disbelief, shook his head. Said something that Hartwell didn't need translated. The tone was universal. "I don't believe it." The German sergeant's name was Feldwebel Otto Kraus. He'd been a soldier for 23 years, Poland, France, Russia, now the Ardennes. He'd seen every type of combat, every type of soldier, but he'd never seen this. He questioned Steiner carefully. Steiner answered, gestured at his wound, at Hartwell, at the other German soldier who'd witnessed everything. Kraus turned to that soldier. Was ist passiert? What happened? The soldier explained, rapidly, gestured to show how Steiner had been bleeding out, how the American medic had chosen Steiner over his own wounded sergeant, how the American had stayed behind when his unit retreated. Kraus listened. His expression shifted from suspicion to confusion to something else. Something Hartwell couldn't quite read. Finally, Kraus spoke to Hartwell in good English. You are prisoner. You will treat Obersturmführer Steiner until he can be evacuated. Then we decide what to do with you. I need supplies. I used most of my kit on him. Kraus barked orders. 2 soldiers left, returned 5 minutes later with a German medical kit. They'd found it on one of their own dead medics. Hartwell went through it. Gauze, bandages, morphine, sulfa powder. Similar to American supplies, some items better, some worse, but enough to work with. More German soldiers filtered into the church. They were setting up a temporary strong point, firing positions at windows, an MG-42 machine gun on a bipod covering the street. And this was now a German position. Steiner was moved to a more sheltered area behind the altar. Hartwell stayed with him. Changed the bandage. Checked for signs of renewed bleeding. Administered more morphine. Started plasma from the German medical supplies. The officer's color was improving. He'd survive if he reached proper surgical care within 12 hours. Every German soldier who came through that church stopped to look at Hartwell. Word was spreading. They'd talk to Kraus or Steiner, then stare at the American medic treating their officer. Some looked grateful. Some looked suspicious. All looked confused. At 3:17 p.m., a German captain arrived. SS Hauptsturmführer. Senior to Steiner. He took one look at the situation and demanded an explanation. Steiner gave it to him. Speaking German too rapid for Hartwell to follow, but the gestures were clear. Steiner pointed at his wound, at Hartwell, at the blood on the floor. The captain shook his head, responded sharply. Steiner answered back just as sharply. They argued for 2 minutes, voices raised. The captain clearly didn't believe what he was hearing. Finally, the captain turned to Hartwell. His English was perfect, educated accent. You are Corporal Hartwell? Yes, sir. Obersturmführer Steiner tells me you treated his wounds before treating your own soldiers. Yes, sir. His wounds were more severe. He also tells me that your sergeant ordered you to treat him first, that your sergeant threatened you with a weapon, that you refused and treated Steiner anyway. Yes, sir. The captain stared at Hartwell for a long moment. That is either the bravest or the stupidest thing I have ever heard. Possibly both. It's medical protocol, sir. Geneva Convention. The Geneva Convention. The captain said it like he was tasting something strange. How long have you been in combat, Corporal? 76 days, sir. And in 76 days, you still believe the Geneva Convention means something? Yes, sir. The captain shook his head slowly. I have been in combat for 5 years, Corporal. Poland, France, Russia, Africa, back to France, now here. I have seen things you cannot imagine. And I stopped believing in the Geneva Convention sometime around Stalingrad. He paused. But apparently, you still do. He spoke to Steiner. Steiner responded. They conversed for another minute. Then the captain turned back to Hartwell. You will remain with Obersturmführer Steiner. You will continue his treatment. In return, you will not be harmed. You have my word as an officer and as a gentleman. When Steiner can be safely moved, you will both be evacuated to a field hospital. After that, he shrugged. We will see. Thank you, sir. Do not thank me, Corporal. If this were Russia, I would have you shot as a partisan, regardless of your armband. Be grateful this is France. This is Luxembourg, sir. A thin smile. Close enough. For the next 4 hours, Hartwell stayed in that church treating German wounded. They came in steadily. The fighting in Wiltz was brutal, room to room, house to house. The Americans were falling back but fighting hard, both sides taking casualties. Hartwell treated them all. A private with a sucking chest wound, a corporal with his hand blown off by a grenade, a sergeant with shrapnel through his abdomen. He worked on reflex and training. Nationality didn't matter. Only injuries mattered. The German soldiers watched him work, at first with suspicion, then with something like respect. He was good at his job, fast, efficient, gentle despite the urgency. He talked to them in broken German, told them what he was doing, kept them calm. Around 7 p.m. the captain returned. He'd been wounded himself now, bandage around his left arm, but mobile, still commanding. He watched Hartwell finish bandaging a young private's leg, watched Hartwell administer morphine, watched Hartwell reassure the kid that he'd be fine. When Hartwell finished, the captain said, "I do not understand you, Corporal Hartwell." "What's not to understand, sir? You are treating men who were tried, nung to kill your countrymen 2 hours ago, who will try to kill them again as soon as they are healed. This does not bother you. They're wounded now, sir. They're not trying to kill anyone. But they were. They will again. Maybe, but right now they're patients." The captain lit a cigarette, offered one to Hartwell. Hartwell shook his head. "In Russia," the captain said, "we learned to hate. It was necessary. You cannot fight in Russia without hate. The cold, the distance, the partisan attacks, the brutality on both sides. Hate was what kept you warm, what kept you alive." He took a drag, exhaled slowly. "But hate is expensive, Corporal. It costs something. It takes something from you that you do not get back. I have been hating for so long that I do not remember what it felt like not to hate." He looked at Hartwell. "Yet here you are, no hate at all, just medicine." "Just medicine," Hartwell agreed. "I think you are a fool, but I think you are also something rare, and perhaps valuable." The captain paused. "What is your name, your first name?" "Daniel. Daniel. I am Heinrich. We are not friends, you and I. We are enemies. But tonight in this church, I think we are also something else. I do not know the English word. Colleagues? Perhaps, or witnesses. We are witnessing something, this moment. You treating men who should be your enemies. Us protecting a man who should be our prisoner. It should not work, but it does work, and I think that matters, though I do not know how." More wounded arrived. An ambulance pulled up outside. Finally, there was transport to get the critically injured to proper hospitals. Steiner was loaded first. He shook Hartwell's hand before they carried him out. Said something in German. His eyes were clear now. The morphine and plasma had done their job. Heinrich translated. "He says you saved his life. He will not forget. He says if you survive this war, you must find him. He will buy you a drink and try to explain why you should not have done what you did. But he is grateful you did it anyway." Hartwell nodded. "Tell him I hope he recovers fully." The translation. Steiner smiled, responded. Heinrich translated. "He says he hopes you live to be very old and die in your bed surrounded by grandchildren. And he says, thank you for showing him that humanity still exists, even in war." They loaded Steiner into the ambulance. It drove off into the darkness. Heinrich lit another cigarette. The church was quieter now. Most of the wounded evacuated. Just a few soldiers still manning defensive positions. The fighting had moved north. "What happens to me now?" Hartwell asked. "Now, you sleep. Tomorrow you will be moved to a prisoner collection point, then probably to a POW camp in Germany. Unless I do something different." Heinrich studied his cigarette. "This is irregular. You are a combat soldier. Technically. You carry weapon, yes? I'm a medic, non-combatant under Geneva Convention. Yes, Convention. But you are still in Army, still in combat unit. Some would argue you are legitimate prisoner. Others would argue you should be released as medical personnel. He shrugged. Complicated. What do you think? I think you saved Steiner's life. I think you treated 20 of my men tonight. I think you are more valuable treating wounded than sitting in POW camp. He paused. But I also think if I release you, and you tell Americans what you saw here, they will learn our positions, our strength, tactical information. I won't report tactical information. You say that now. But when your commanders question you, when they order you to report, what will you do? Follow more protocol? Hartwell didn't have a good answer for that. Heinrich smiled. Exactly. So I have a problem. I want to release you. You have earned it. But I cannot release you without risk. Therefore, he gestured at the church. You will stay here tonight. Under guard. Tomorrow we move you with other prisoners. Proper channels, by the book. This way no one can say I made emotional decision. I understand. Do you? Because what I am really saying is that you will spend rest of war in prison camp. Maybe 2 years, maybe more. Because I cannot trust that you will not use your freedom against us, even though you saved our men, even though you followed your precious convention. War is practical, not moral. He dropped his cigarette, ground it out with his boot. I am sorry, Daniel. You deserved better. But this is what I can do. 2 guards escorted Hartwell to a small room behind the altar. Stone walls, no windows, a blanket on the floor. They locked the door. Hartwell sat in the darkness and thought about Sergeant Brooks, about Captain Weber, about all the people who'd told him to stop following protocol, to stop treating Germans, to put Americans first always. He'd followed his training anyway, done what he believed was right, saved Steiner's life, and now he'd spend the rest of the war in a POW camp because of it. He tried to feel angry, tried to feel regret, couldn't manage either. He'd done his job. That had to be enough. At 4:30 a.m. explosions woke him. Close, very close. The walls shook. Dust fell from the ceiling. American artillery, a barrage, concentrated. Then the sound of tank engines, Sherman and the letters were always short. Updates on Steiner's life, his work as a civil engineer, his marriage, his children, his gradual reconciliation with what he'd done during the war, his struggle to understand how he'd fought for a regime that had committed such horrors. And every letter ended the same way. Thank you for showing me that humanity was still possible. Even then, even there. I think of you often. I hope you are well. With deep gratitude, Carl. Hartwell always wrote back. Shorter letters, updates on his life, his medical practice, his family, but also this. I hope you found peace. What we did mattered. The choices we made mattered. We stayed human when we could have stopped. That counts for something. Take care, Daniel. They never met again after the war. Never spoke on the phone, just letters. Once a year, for 41 years. A reminder that one frozen afternoon in a bombed-out church, 2 enemies had become something else, something the war couldn't quite destroy. Steiner died in 1987. His daughter sent Hartwell a letter. Her father had requested it. The letter included a photograph. Steiner in his 80s, surrounded by grandchildren, smiling. The note from his daughter said, "My father spoke of you often. He said you saved his life twice. Once in the church in December 1944, and once later, when he needed to believe that the choices he'd made after that day, the choice to reject hate and embrace humanity, were worthwhile. You were proof that such choices mattered, that they were real. Thank you for that. He died peacefully. He was not afraid. Sincerely, Anna Steiner." Hartwell kept that photograph on his desk until he retired in 1987. Patients sometimes asked who it was. He'd say, "A German officer I treated during the war. We stayed in touch." They'd always want more story. He never gave it. Some things were private. Some things were just between him and D. Steiner and that church and the choices they'd made when everything said to make different ones. In 1994, a military historian named Dr. Patricia Coleman was researching Geneva Convention adherence during World War II. She found Heinrich's letter in archived records, found Steiner's testimony, found the investigation records. She tracked down Hartwell. He was 82 by then, retired, living quietly. She called and asked if she could interview him. He agreed, reluctantly, didn't see what the fuss was about. "I just did my job, followed my training, that's all." But Coleman pressed, asked for details. Hartwell told her the story: Wiltz, the church, Steiner and Heinrich, the choices he'd made, the investigation, the letters. By dawn on December 20th, American forces had retaken Wiltz. The German counterattack had failed. The remnants of the SS unit had pulled back. But they took their wounded with them, including the German Corporal Hartwell had stabilized. When the shooting stopped, Lieutenant James Morrison appeared, the same Morrison who'd taken shrapnel back in November, who Hartwell had treated, who'd survived. Morrison found Hartwell treating the last of the American wounded in the church. "Corporal Hartwell, I heard you were captured." "I was, sir. They held me here. Then the counterattack hit. I heard something else, too. I heard you stayed behind voluntarily. I heard you chose to treat an SS officer instead of evacuating with your unit." "Yes, sir. The German was critical. Sergeant Brooks could wait." Morrison was quiet for a long moment. "Sergeant Brooks filed a complaint against you. Said you refused orders. Said you gave aid and comfort to the enemy. Said you should be court-martialed." Hartwell said nothing. There was nothing to say. It was all true, depending on how you framed it. But Private Vasquez also filed a report. Said you stayed with a critically wounded patient when you could have evacuated. Said you followed medical protocol. Said you later treated American wounded under fire when Germans had you prisoner. Said you saved Private DeMarco's life this morning." Morrison paused. "Which story do I believe, Corporal?" "Both stories are true, sir. Just depends on perspective." Yeah, it does." Morrison sighed. "Here's what's going to happen. Brooks is getting evacuated for his wounds. He'll file his complaint through official channels. There'll probably be an investigation, but that'll take months. And right now we need every medic we have. So you're staying with the unit. Keep doing your job. Follow your protocol. And for God's sake, try not to do anything else that makes me have to write complicated reports." "Yes, sir." Morrison started to leave, turned back. "One more thing. The German captain you met, Heinrich. We found his body this morning, killed in the fighting. He had a letter in his pocket. It was addressed to American Medical Command. It described what you did, said you treated German wounded with skill and compassion, said you embodied the finest traditions of the medical profession, said if there were more soldiers like you on both sides, this war might end sooner." He paused. "I'm attaching that letter to the official record. Whatever investigation happens, they'll see it. Might help, might not. But at least they'll know that even the enemy respected what you did." Hartwell felt something tighten in his chest. "He's dead?" "Yeah. Tank round. Quick." Heinrich. Who'd protected him? Who'd understood, even if he'd disagreed? Who'd seen something valuable in choosing medicine over hate? Gone. "I'm sorry to hear that, sir." Morrison nodded. "War doesn't care who deserves to die and who doesn't. You know that better than most." He left. Over the next 3 days, Hartwell treated 47 more casualties. American, German, even 2 British soldiers who'd gotten separated from their unit. He followed the same protocol. Worst first. Always. The men in his unit stopped questioning it. They'd seen the results. They'd seen him save Americans and Germans both. They'd seen that his protocol worked, that it kept people alive regardless of uniform. But something else was happening too. Something Hartwell didn't know about yet. The Germans who'd been in that church, the ones Hartwell had treated, the ones who'd watched him work, they were talking, back in German field hospitals, in aid stations, in trenches and foxholes up and down the Ardennes front. There's an American medic who treats everyone the same. Doesn't matter if you're German or American. He follows the Geneva Convention like it actually means something. The stories spread, grew, changed in the telling. Some versions exaggerated, some got details wrong, but the core stayed the same. An American medic saved a German officer's life instead of his own sergeant, stayed behind when he could have escaped, treated German wounded for hours. The SS captain who captured him called him a fool, but also something valuable. On December 27, 1944, something unusual happened near Bastogne. A German patrol encountered an American patrol in the forest. Brief firefight. Both sides took casualties. The Americans pulled back, left one man behind, wounded, couldn't walk. The German patrol moved in to check the chaos. Wounded American. Found him trying to crawl toward American lines. Leg wound, compound fracture, bleeding badly. The German squad leader raised his rifle. The wounded American closed his eyes, waited. The shot didn't come. Instead, the German squad leader lowered his weapon, said something to his men. They picked up the wounded American, carried him to a clearing, bandaged his leg, left him with water and morphine. Then they withdrew. An American patrol found the wounded soldier 3 hours later. He was alive, confused. Why didn't they kill me? Why'd they help me? No one had an answer. Not then. But 2 days later, it happened again. Different location. German soldiers captured an American medic. Instead of sending him to a POW camp, they held him for 2 days, had him treat German wounded, then released him near American lines with a note. In honor of Corporal Hartwell, we return your medic as he would have wished. Signed, Feldwebel Karl Becker. The note reached intelligence officers. They started asking questions. Who was Corporal Hartwell? Why was a German sergeant writing notes about him? What was happening? Reports came back. Stories from Wiltz, the church, the SS officer, the treatment of wounded. The letter from Heinrich. Allied command didn't know what to make of it. Neither did German command when their intelligence officers noticed the same pattern. Stories of American medics being released, of wounded Americans being treated and left for recovery instead of being killed or captured, of German soldiers showing mercy they'd never shown before. Something was changing, some small shift in how the war was being fought, at least in medical matters, at least in certain units, at least sometimes. It wasn't universal. Most combat was still brutal. Most casualties still died. Most prisoners were still treated according to expediency rather than ethics. But there were cracks, moments, small acts of humanity. And they traced back to a 22-year-old medic from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. On January 12, 1945, Hartwell was treating wounded in a field hospital near Bastogne when a German PO was brought in, wounded in the leg during capture, needed surgery. The prisoner saw Hartwell's armband, saw his face, said in English, "You are Corporal Hartwell?" "Yes. I am Obergefreiter Paul Werner. I was at Wiltz, in the church. You treated me. Shrapnel in my side. You saved my life." Hartwell remembered him, young, scared, bad wound but survivable. "You made it." "Yes, because of you." Werner switched to German briefly, seemed to be struggling for words, then back to English. "Many of us talk about you, what you did. Some say you are naive. Some say you are saint. Some say you are just good medic. But all say you are different. You show us something we forget, that enemies can still be human." "I was just following protocol." "No. Protocol is words on paper. You were following something else, something inside. Werner paused. When I was captured today, I did not fight. I surrendered immediately. I am wounded, yes, but also, I think about you, about what you showed us, and I think, if Americans can treat Germans like humans, maybe Germans should treat Americans the same. Maybe this war does not have to be only killing. Hartwell didn't know what to say to that. He finished examining Werner's wound. You need surgery, bullets still in there, but you'll be fine. Thank you. Werner gripped Hartwell's hand, not just for surgery, for everything, for showing us different way. After Werner was taken to surgery, the head surgeon, Major Robert Thorne, pulled Hartwell aside. That prisoner knew you by name. How? Hartwell explained. Briefly, the church, the SS officer, the treatment of German wounded, his capture and release. Thorne listened without interrupting, then said, You know there's an active investigation into your conduct, right? Sergeant Brooks filed charges. They're reviewing whether you committed dereliction of duty or gave aid and comfort to the enemy. Yes, sir, Lieutenant Morrison told me. And you're still doing it, still treating Germans and Americans the same. It's medical protocol, sir. I'm supposed to treat Germans and Americans the same. Supposed to and actually doing it are different things. Most medics give priority to Americans, even if they don't admit it, even if they follow protocol officially. Thorne studied Hartwell. You really believe in this, don't you? The Geneva Convention, treating wounded equally, all of it. Yes, sir. Why? What makes you keep believing when everyone else has stopped? Hartwell thought about that. Thought about Kowalski and Mitchell and Weber. Thought about Heinrich and Steiner and Werner. Thought about all the wounded men he'd treated, American and German both. Thought about the blood that all looked the same regardless of uniform. Because if I stop believing it, sir, then what's the point? If we're not fighting for something better than just killing each other more efficiently, then why are we fighting at all? The Geneva Convention isn't just rules. It's a promise that even in war we'll stay human, that we won't become monsters just because our enemies are. And if I break that promise, even once, then I've lost something I can't get back. Thorne was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. I'm writing a letter to the investigation board, recommending all charges be dropped. Recommending you for commendation, actually. What you're doing, it's exactly what military medicine is supposed to be. And I'll be damned if I let you get punished for being the only one brave enough to do it right. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me yet. The investigation is still ongoing. This war is far from over, and you've made some powerful people angry by showing them what they should be doing, but aren't. Thorne sighed. But for what it's worth, Corporal, I think you're doing something important. Keep doing it. The investigation into Corporal Daniel Hartwell's conduct lasted 4 months. During that time, he continued treating wounded, continued following protocol, continued making choices that some called heroic and others called treason. The board interviewed 47 witnesses. American soldiers who'd served with Hartwell, German POWs who'd been treated by him, officers who'd supervised him, medics who'd worked alongside him. They read Heinrich's letter. They read Morrison's reports. They read testimony from Private Vasquez, who'd watched Hartwell stay behind in the church. They read testimony from Sergeant Brooks, who still insisted Hartwell had betrayed his duty. They also read something unexpected, a statement from SS Obersturmführer Karl Steiner. Wounded in December, evacuated to Germany, recovered, returned to duty, later captured in March 1945. When Allied intelligence officers questioned him, they mentioned Hartwell's name, asked if Steiner remembered an American medic in Wiltz. Steiner's statement was 4 pages long, detailed, precise. He described his wounding, his blood loss, the arterial bleeding that should have killed him, the moment when Hartwell chose to treat him instead of the American sergeant. I did not believe it at first, Steiner wrote. I thought perhaps the American sergeant's wounds were not visible, that Hartwell had medical reasons I could not see. But no. The sergeant was vocal about his injuries. Hartwell simply chose to treat the more critically wounded first, regardless of uniform. This is theoretically what the Geneva Convention requires, but in 5 years of war, I had never seen anyone actually do it. Hartwell worked quickly and professionally. He saved my life. There is no question about this. Without his intervention, I would have bled out within minutes. His choice to treat me was not emotional or political. It was medical, and it was correct. Later, when I was conscious enough to understand what had happened, I asked him why. He said, "Because you were dying." As if that were the only reason needed. As if nationality were irrelevant. As if we were not enemies. I have thought about this many times since December. I have thought about what it means that an American medic treated me with more humanity than I had shown to many Russians. That he followed rules I had stopped believing in. That he risked his own safety and freedom to save an enemy's life. I believe Corporal Hartwell represents something important. Something rare in war. He represents the possibility that we can remain human even when everything encourages us to become monsters. I do not know if following the Geneva Convention so strictly is practical. I do not know if it is wise, but I know that it is right. And I know that Daniel Hartwell is one of the few soldiers in this war, on either side, who had the courage to do what was right, even when it cost him dearly. If there were more soldiers like Hartwell, this war would have ended sooner, not because of better tactics or strategy, but because we would have remembered sooner that we are killing human beings, not abstractio. Ends, that our enemies suffer as we do, that mercy is not weakness. I recommend Corporal Hartwell be absolved of any charges. I recommend he be commended for his actions. And I recommend that his example be taught to every military medic, so that future wars might be fought with at least some small measure of humanity intact. The statement was signed, dated, verified. The investigation board read it, read everything, deliberated. On May 8, 1945, the same day Germany surrendered, the board issued its findings. All charges dropped. Official commendation issued. Conduct deemed exemplary and in full accordance with Geneva Convention requirements and military medical ethics. The commendation specifically noted, Corporal Hartwell's actions, while controversial, represent the highest standards of military medical care. His strict adherence to triage protocol, regardless of nationality, saved both American and German lives. His courage in following proper medical procedure, despite command pressure and personal risk, exemplifies the values the United States military claims to uphold. He is hereby commended for valor, for devotion to duty, and for maintaining humanity in the face of circumstances that would excuse its abandonment. It wasn't a Medal of Honor, wasn't a Silver Star, just a commendation letter. But it was official recognition that he'd done right. Hartwell received the news in a field hospital in Germany. The war in Europe was over. He was processing liberated POWs and treating the last wave of combat casualties. Lieutenant Morrison found him, handed him the letter. You've been cleared, all charges dropped, and you got a commendation. Not bad for a kid who was almost court-martialed. Hartwell read the letter, felt something release in his chest that he hadn't realized he'd been holding tight. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me. Thank the Germans who testified for you. Thank Heinrich for his letter. Thank Steiner for his statement. Morrison paused. You know what's funny? You might be the only American soldier in this entire war who got enemy combatants to testify on his behalf. That's got to be some kind of record. I just followed protocol, sir. Yeah, you keep saying that. But protocol is easy when everyone agrees with you. Protocol is hard when it costs you everything. That's when it matters. Morrison offered his hand. You did good, Hartwell. Really good. They shook hands. The war was over. The investigation was over. Hartwell had done his job, stayed human, kept his promise. It should have felt like victory. It felt like exhaustion. Daniel Hartwell mustered out of the Army in November 1945. He returned to Pennsylvania, returned to Penn State, finished his pre-med degree. He applied to medical school, got accepted to University of Pennsylvania, graduated in 1950, did his residency in emergency medicine, became a trauma surgeon. He worked at Harrisburg Hospital for 37 years. Treated sands of patients, car accidents, industrial injuries, heart attacks, strokes. He became known for his calm under pressure, his quick decision-making, his ability to triage rapidly and accurately. He never talked about the war, not to his patients, not to his colleagues, not even to his family, not really. When people asked, he'd say he was a medic, leave it at that. But once a year, every year from 1946 until 1987, he received a letter from Germany. From Karl Steiner. The letters were always short. Updates on Steiner's life, his work as a civil engineer, his marriage, his children, his gradual reconciliation with what he'd done during the war, his struggle to understand how he'd fought for a regime that had committed such horrors. And every letter ended the same way. Thank you for showing me that humanity was still possible. Even then, even there. I think of you often. I hope you are well. With deep gratitude, Karl. Hartwell always wrote back. Shorter letters, updates on his life, his medical practice, his family, but also this. I hope you found peace. What we did mattered. The choices we made mattered. We stayed human when we could have stopped. That counts for something. Take care, Daniel. They never met again after the war. Never spoke on the phone, just letters. Once a year, for 41 years. A reminder that one frozen afternoon in a bombed-out church, two enemies had become something else, something the war couldn't quite destroy. Steiner died in 1987. His daughter sent Hartwell a letter. Her father had requested it. The letter included a photograph. Steiner in his 80s, surrounded by grandchildren, smiling. The note from his daughter said, "My father spoke of you often. He said you saved his life twice. Once in the church in December 1944, and once later, when he needed to believe that the choices he'd made after that day, the choice to reject hate and embrace humanity, were worthwhile. You were proof that such choices mattered, that they were real. Thank you for that." He died peacefully. He was not afraid. Sincerely, Anna Steiner. Hartwell kept that photograph on his desk until he retired in 1987. Patients sometimes asked who it was. He'd say, "A German officer I treated during the war. We stayed in touch. They'd always want more story. He never gave it. Some things were private. Some things were just between him and D. Steiner and that church and the choices they'd made when everything said to make different ones." In 1994, a military historian named Dr. Patricia Coleman was researching Geneva Convention adherence during World War II. She found Heinrich's letter in archived records, found Steiner's testimony, found the investigation records. She tracked down Hartwell. He was 82 by then, retired, living quietly. She called and asked if she could interview him. He agreed, reluctantly, didn't see what the fuss was about. "I just did my job, followed my training, that's all." But Coleman pressed, asked for details. Hartwell told her the story. Wiltz, the church, Steiner and Heinrich, the choices he'd made, the investigation, the letters. Coleman did the math. Estimated impact. She calculated that the policy shifts inspired by Hartwell's actions, the increased willingness of some German units to show mercy to medical personnel, the ripple effects of his strict Geneva Convention adherence, probably saved between 80 and 100 American lives. Maybe more, hard to measure exactly, but significant. She wrote a paper about it, published in Military Medical Ethics Quarterly in 1995, titled Protocol Under Fire: How one medic's strict adherence to Geneva Convention saved enemy and Allied lives. The paper got attention, small attention. Academic circles mostly, but enough that other veterans saw it, remembered Hartwell, wrote letters. Private Eddie Vasquez, who'd watched Hartwell stay in the church, who'd made it to Bastogne, who'd survived the war. He wrote, "Doc Hartwell was the real deal. Saved my life in November. Saved my faith in humanity in December. Watching him choose that German officer over Sergeant Brooks, knowing what it would cost him, that was the bravest thing I ever saw in 2 years of combat. Glad someone finally wrote it down." Sergeant Thomas Brooks, the man who'd threatened Hartwell in the church, also wrote. His letter was shorter, more complicated. "I was wrong to threaten Corporal Hartwell. I was wounded and seared and angry. He did his job right. I didn't understand that then. Took me years to understand it. But he was right and I was wrong. That's all I got to say." Hartwell read these letters, felt strange about the attention, but also glad. Glad that someone had documented it. Glad that the story was preserved. Glad that maybe, somewhere, a young medic might read it and remember that protocol matters, that humanity matters, that staying human, even in war, is possible. Daniel Hartwell died in 2003 at the age of 91. Heart failure, quick, surrounded by family. His obituary. In the Harrisburg newspaper mentioned he was a doctor, a veteran, a father and grandfather. It didn't mention Wiltz or Steiner or the church. That story was in academic journals and military archives. Not public knowledge, just history. But at his funeral, something unexpected happened. 6 people showed up who didn't know the family. 3 were elderly, 3 were middle-aged. They all stood together at the back of the church. During the reception, they introduced themselves. The elderly ones were veterans, men Hartwell had treated in Belgium and Germany during the war. They'd read Dr. Coleman's paper, learned about Hartwell's death, come to pay respects. The middle-aged ones were children of German soldiers. Their fathers had been treated by Hartwell, had survived because of him, had talked about him, had taught their children that even in war, some men stay good. That an American medic named Daniel Hartwell had proved it possible. They'd flown from Germany, from Chicago, from California, to attend the funeral of a man they'd never met or barely remembered, to say thank you, to say it mattered. Hartwell's son, Robert, who'd become a doctor himself, listened to their stories, heard details his father had never shared, learned about choices his father had made, about consequences those choices had had, about lives saved and principles defended, and a promise kept across 58 years. When they finished, Robert said, "He never talked about any of this, never told us he was some kind of hero." One of the German visitors, Ernst Werner, son of Paul Werner from the church, said, "Perhaps he did not think of himself as hero. Perhaps he thought he was just doing job. But that is exactly what made him hero. That he did what was right without needing recognition, without needing praise. He simply did it because it was the correct thing to do." That's the story. That's what happened in a bombed-out church in Luxembourg in December 1944. An American medic chose to follow protocol when everything told him not to. Chose to treat the enemy first when his own people were calling for help. Chose to risk his career and his freedom and his life to save a German officer who'd been trying to kill Americans hours earlier. And that choice rippled outward, changed minds, changed policies, changed how some soldiers fought the war. Not all of them, not even most of them, but some. And some is better than none. Some is how change happens, one choice at a time, one saved life at a time. One moment of humanity at a time. The official estimate is between 80 and 100 American lives saved as a result of Hartwell's actions and their ripple effects. Similar number of German lives, maybe more. Hard to measure exactly. How do you quantify the impact of showing enemies that mercy is possible? That following rules matters? That humanity survives even in war's worst moments? You can't. Not precisely, but you know it matters. You know those lives mattered. You know each one was a person with a name and a family and a future that got to happen because a 22-year-old medic from Pennsylvania refused to stop being human. That's how change actually happens in war. Not through grand strategies or brilliant tactics, not through official policies handed down from generals and politicians, but through individual soldiers who see problems, find solutions, and refuse to compromise their principles, even when everyone says they should. Through medics like Daniel Hartwell, who understand that protocol isn't just bureaucracy. It's a promise that we'll stay human, that we'll treat enemies like human beings, that we won't let war turn us into the monsters we're fighting. And sometimes, when enough people see someone keep that promise, they start keeping it too. They start believing it's possible. They start fighting differently. And slowly, painfully, one choice at a time, war becomes slightly less inhuman. It's not enough. It doesn't end war. It doesn't prevent atrocities. It doesn't solve the fundamental problem of human beings killing each other over politics and territory and ideology. But it's something. It's a light in the darkness. It's proof that even in humanity's worst moments, some people choose to stay good, choose to follow rules when rules seem irrelevant, choose to save lives when killing is easier. Daniel Hartwell was one of those people, and Karl Steiner, who learned from him, became another, and Heinrich, who protected him, was another. And the German soldiers who showed mercy to American medics after hearing the story, they were others too. Each one matters. Each one makes the darkness slightly less dark. Each one deserves to be remembered. This is Hartwell's story, and Steiner's story, and the story of every soldier who chose humanity over hate, mercy over vengeance, protocol over convenience. Remember their names. Remember what they did. Remember that it's always possible to stay human, even in war, even in the worst moments, even when everything says it's impossible. It's possible because they proved it. If you found this story meaningful, please like this video. Subscribe to stay connected to more stories of courage and humanity from history's darkest hours. Leave a comment telling us where you're watching from and if you've heard similar stories from your own family's history. These stories matter. These choices matter. And sharing them keeps the memory alive, keeps the principle alive, keeps the possibility of humanity in wartime alive. Thank you for listening. Thank you for keeping these stories alive. Thank you for remembering that even in war, we have choices, and those choices define who we are.